Crypto Wealth Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about mass adoption, cryptocurrency mass adoption, how China could lead the way to mass adoption of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. And I'm going to talk about this. Probably I'm going to take an approach to this that you may or may not fully expect. So if you're listening to me through the podcast, then you want to check my channel. I'll have a lot of links and things that I reference in this podcast on my YouTube channel. All you have to do is go to YouTube. You can search Crypto Wealth to find my YouTube channel. So this past weekend, I actually ended up watching a documentary. Let me see if I can find it. I think it's right here. This China, Power and Prosperity. Watch the full documentary. Now, I haven't actually finished the documentary. I'm actually 2/3 of the way through it. But it was really interesting. Now, I know a little bit about China, some of their economics and some of their political components, if you will. But I really just understood it from a high level perspective, I guess you could say, for lack of better terms. I didn't really understand some of the real nitty gritty. I actually didn't realize that the president of China had term limits suspended. Anytime that I hear that, it kind of gives me chills up my backbone, because you can't get more authoritarian than saying, hey, no one else can be elected to replace me. But it was an incredible documentary that really got deep down. And the reason, by the way, the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think many, if not all, I'll say most governments in the world, I believe, would choose to govern. They may make different decisions, but if they could get away with it, they would choose to govern the way China does. And that is from a place of extreme authoritarianism, where there's a leader who is, not a dictator like a Stalin, but but that's just because he simply makes different choices. The president of China, Xi Jinping, or however he says his name, President Xi, however he says his name, Xi, he can absolutely be a full-on Stalinistic dictator if he wanted to be. He has enough authority. And I didn't realize really how much authority he had. And really just watching some of what China's doing and what they're looking to do, I think the reason that it's scary, because I think in America, we're a long ways from moving to where China's at. But realistically, I think we are making more strides towards China's methods than China's making towards American democratic methods. Over time, if you're going to be honest with yourself over time, then you have to realize that the corruption in our government is extreme and becomes more apparent every single day. In the past, governments weren't as corrupt as they were. They were. Let me rephrase it. They had to be a little more subtle with their corruption. They had to be a little bit. They tended to be. I can't think of the word I'm looking for. They say one thing and do another. They misrepresent themselves. Hypocritical. They tended to be hypocritical. And a great example of this, really and truly, is the Trump administration. Now, again, I don't care whether you're for or against Trump. The reality is I'm an equal opportunity offender. It doesn't matter to me if you're Republican or Democrat. I do my best to think as independently as possible and to be as objective to both sides. So with that being said, I think there are some things you could say. You have to be intellectually dishonest to say there's nothing good that Trump has done. All you have to do is look at the unemployment rates and recognize that he's done some good things. However, the man is clearly screwing some things up along the way as well. See, told you, equal opportunity offender. I just pissed off half of you that think that Trump is amazing and the other half that thinks he's, the worst on the planet. Probably not the best way to launch a podcast, and probably not the best way to get subscribers on my YouTube channel. But look, it is what it is. Let's think objectively about this. For example, the Republicans have always been sort of the reputation, and based on the party platform, supposed to be the party of kind of fiscal responsibility. Cut taxes, lower government spending, the whole 9 yards. But if you look at, I saw this article on the Hill website this past weekend, $1 trillion deficits as far as the eye can see, and hardly a voice of caution to be heard. And the whole idea is Trump, claimed he was going to get rid of the deficit, and some of his, I guess his fans would say, arguably, give him some time, give him another 4 years. Of course, that's convenient because there's going to be no recourse or no accountability if he doesn't rein in spending in his last last term, and there's been no president to ever rein in their spending. But it's this crazy spending that's going to force us to be in a place where ultimately we're going to have a cryptocurrency. I believe that's where we're going long term. We're going to have a cryptocurrency that's going to replace all forms of fiat currency, because ultimately I think that citizens are just going to lose total faith in any form of government backed fiat currency. And let me say also government backed cryptocurrency as well. When I talk about cryptocurrency, I'm only talking about decentralized third-party blockchain technologies that can serve as a currency. I'm not talking about centralized control, blockchain technologies. Those exist, and I believe there's a place for those, primarily in DApp management, database management, and stuff like that, decentralized applications, but not in the place of currency. You want a currency, a cryptocurrency that is designed with the primary use case to be currency. You don't want anyone to have control over that. You want it to be decentralized, third-party cryptocurrency. But yet, here's Trump, the current Republican, leader of the U.S., and massive debt. I mean, the government, literally, our government is in a position where I was watching in the documentary I was telling you about on YouTube. And again, let me just give you the name of that documentary if you want to check it out for yourself. I highly recommend you watching it. China, Power, and Prosperity. Just go to YouTube and search China, Power, and Prosperity. But, one of the things they talked about was how China was positioning themselves. And clearly, China is a growing empire. Clearly. I think they have 2 different military bases that are abroad, meaning in other countries, other locations. And their infrastructure projects they have and the way they negotiate is really, really fascinating. And what they're doing. And basically, it looks like, according to this documentary, they're really looking to exert control by negotiating these massive road projects, high-speed rail projects throughout many other countries, all the way, including countries in South America. And then, it appears they put some of these countries into debt, and then they exert their control over those countries once they kind of default on the debt. But if they don't default on the debt, then it's just creating a tremendous amount of revenue for the Chinese government. So it's really, from China's perspective, it's definitely a win-win. Now, I want to come back and talk about something. I said earlier that a lot of people would probably prefer, and the reason I'm talking so much about China and kind of what they're doing, their geopolitics, is because these are the fundamental factors that ultimately will lead to mass adoption. Because at some point, as a citizen, you only have so many options or so many things you can do to protect your financial assets, to protect your wealth, and basically to prevent the government from stealing it from you. And so when I say that, I want to back up. When I say that I think a lot of governments would want to rule the way China does, I think it's natural for any leader to want to be able to have total control and say so, or at least majority control and say so. You look at any company, for example, right? Typically, it's going to be centralized by the CEO. There may be a board of directors that could get rid of the CEO, but that really is a last-ditch effort. Typically, the CEO is brought on board by the board of directors. But you take a look at Trump. Trump clearly wishes that he could be, the CEO of America, so to speak, and there didn't have to be this balance of power. Now, that was the whole checks and balances with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Now, that's what makes America truly great, pun intended, I guess, is that there is this checks and balances from our 3 equal branches of the government. But I would argue that over time, these checks and balances are slowly getting eroded away. Let me know what you think in the comments on my YouTube channel. Do you agree with that? However, if you look at what China's doing and you look at the things they're building, America has so much debt. I don't think that we could afford the new financial expenditures of doing what China's doing throughout the rest of the world. Like, I literally think, if you look at the Cold War, one of the things that happened in the Cold War was America basically ultimately bankrupted Russia. They could not continue to build up, if you will. But if you look at China, I don't know if America could compete with China because financially we're running out of options. How much bigger can the deficits go? And if America does try to compete with China by building infrastructure on all these other planets, if they do try to do that, now you're talking about something that's going to be crazy to our debt and our deficit. And I can't even, I mean, it's hard to even comprehend what that would mean long term, meaning for financially or economically for America. And if we don't compete with China directly with that infrastructure in other countries, where does that ultimately leave us as a player in the geopolitical world? Now, I believe that it's through this central authority, central planning. When I talk about China basically ushering in mass adoption or leading to mass adoption, I think is ultimately a revolt against authoritarianism that's going to lead to cryptocurrency mass adoption. Most people are like, cryptocurrency mass adoption is going to take place when the technology is there. I disagree with that wholeheartedly. Wholeheartedly. I think mass adoption will occur sheerly out of necessity. I believe that, like, you don't care, Bitcoin's not usable. It takes 30 minutes for a transaction in some cases to go through. I actually don't think you care about that if you're concerned enough about your government taking your wealth through inflation. I wanna show you something here. There's a great video I was watching part of it earlier. I didn't finish. John McAfee is on the YouTube channel Monero Talk. It's a great YouTube channel that focuses primarily on Monero. And if you don't know what Monero is, it is a cryptocurrency that is extremely privacy focused. A lot of people think Bitcoin's privacy focused, but Bitcoin in and of itself is not really privacy focused. I mean, there are ways to track down. The government is using things called chain analytics to basically track down and create profiles to figure out who you are using your Bitcoin address. But Monero, basically, you can't use chain analytics on Monero to be able to figure out who's using Monero and who's spending. It's probably the number one. It is the number one privacy cryptocurrency. But I want to listen to what John McAfee talks about. He's talking about the road to mass adoption. And let's just listen to just this little minute of what he has to say.
For the goal. I knew what would come. I went straight from there in my mind back in 2010 to, whoa, let's look a little bit at the implications 10 years down the line. There's going to be either a civil war or a totalitarian crackdown or some sort of hypnosis that convinces the populace that yes, cryptocurrency is good, and we have adopted it. We've got the crypto dollar, like China's making the crypto yen. Every couple have a crypto thing. I saw this in 2010 in a flash. Yeah, so obviously governments will steal this from us.
So he's talking about governments will steal cryptocurrency technology from us. And the main way they'll do that is through marketing. There's this false narrative. Bitcoin is bad because it's used somehow on the dark web to do, illicit activities, or it's used for money laundering. The US dollar has been used for money laundering far more than cryptocurrency and has been used for far more illicit activities, but you don't hear anyone saying, oh, the US dollar is bad. And once you wake up to that, like you even see it on many common news stories, anytime Bitcoin comes up, the host will be like, and by the way, if you don't know this, almost all hosts on your news shows, they're reading from a teleprompter. It's not their own ideas, it's not their own mind. And oftentimes they have earpieces. If you look closely, they have earpieces. Sean Hannity on Fox News is always easy to see. They have an earpiece, and that's where producers and people are talking to them in real time, giving them feedback, sometimes telling them what to say, what to ask when they're doing like an interview, for example. But in most cases, they're just reading off of a teleprompter that's telling them what to say. And you'll hear them say things like, well, do you think Bitcoin's going to go up? Do you think it's going to go down? What do you think, isn't Bitcoin that thing that's illegal or that, people use it for illegal activities or whatnot? And it's just, they're demonized. And you have to just ask yourself, why is this technology so often getting demonized? By the way, that John McAfee interviews on Monero Talk. Monero talk. It was recorded on the 29th. So you can look that up on YouTube. And while you're over there on YouTube, do me a favor, subscribe to my channel, Crypto Wealth. You can re-listen to this on there as well if you want, and you can kind of see what I'm doing on my screen as I point to different things. Obviously, YouTube's a much more visual medium. But when the whole narrative thing that's taken place, the other thing that with governments in the future, the other thing that they may be doing is they'll be talking about, hey, don't use Bitcoin because you shouldn't trust it, but we have this other, the U.S. coin or the China coin or whatever. We have this other cryptocurrency that our government's back, therefore it's safe, therefore it's secure. In China's case, I think they'll just be forced to use it. By the way, another I'll get back to this in a minute. I've got a story about, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. So take a China man interrogated for criticizing police on social media. So this is fascinating. Even what I'm doing right here on YouTube, I would not be able to do in China. This man got interrogated for just criticizing the police on social media. Listen to what was said. A video out of China shows a man being called in and interrogated by authorities for the crime of criticizing the police on social media. Now listen to what he criticized the police about. That's what's so crazy. It wasn't anything ludicrous. The clip shows the man handcuffed to a metal chair as he's asked personal questions. Why did you complain about the police on QQ and WeChat? Now, QQ and WeChat are both like social media platforms. But they asked him, why did you complain about the police? He's then grilled about his screen name and activity in group chat on the WeChat platform. Why did you talk about the traffic police online? What's wrong with police confiscating motorcycles? He's then asked. The man attempts to come across as apologetic, but is then asked again, why did you badmouth the police? Do you hate the police? The man explains that he was drunk when he made the comments and is then asked to apologize to the police. I'm so sorry, I'm wrong, I know that now. Please forgive me, I won't do it again, ever, he states. Under its social credit score system, China punishes people who criticize the government, as well as numerous other behaviors, including bad driving, smoking on trains, buying too many video games, buying too much junk food, buying too much alcohol, calling a friend who has a low credit score, having a friend online who has a low credit score, posting fake news online, visiting unauthorized websites, walking your dog without a leash, letting your dog bark too much. Okay, so if you don't know what the social credit score is in China, they covered it a little bit in the documentary I told you about earlier. The social credit score system is basically a system where China monitors through video cameras and who knows what else their citizens and facial recognition software. If you don't know this, China is like some of the best at facial recognition software. And based off what you do, if you're caught driving bad on camera, if you're caught smoking on trains, and the documentary talks about how sophisticated this is and how they can literally go back in time and essentially do like a Google query and find out all sorts of information. The police can, the government can, etc. But this social score, think about it. It lowers your social score. Now, this is a literal social credit score that involves your credit, like good credit, bad credit. And so imagine if for example, let me tell you what happens if you have a good social score. You pay 20% less when you book airfare. When you go to the movies, you pay a little less. If you have an okay score, you pay 100%. If you have a bad social credit score, you might not be allowed to book an airplane ticket. Like, it's that extreme. And literally what they're doing is they're social engineering a society. They're curbing bad behavior, but it's creating control. There's no individual freedom for that. And I don't know about you, but I'm not ready for America. And for that matter, I'm not ready for Europe to lose those sort of freedoms. And I'm not even a European citizen, but who wants to be told? I mean, think about this. Your social credit score is hurt if you call a friend who happens to have a low social credit score. Think about that. If you call them on the phone, if you have a friend on Facebook or social media who has a low social credit score. So now all of a sudden, if your social credit score starts dropping, people start ostracizing you. They don't want to talk to you because they don't want it to affect their social credit score. I mean, that's crazy to think that in modern era today, a country like China, which is as modern as they are already at that place. That's crazy. Back in August, the communist state bragged about how it had prevented 2.5 million discredited entities from purchasing plane tickets. There you go. 2.5 million people could not purchase plane tickets in China. 90,000 people from buying high-speed train tickets in the month of July alone. So 90,000 people could not buy high-speed train tickets because they have a low social credit score. Citizens will also be forced to pass a facial recognition test that runs them through the social credit score database before being allowed to use the internet. Think about that. That is crazy, crazy. By the way, so why do I think that governments aren't going to be friendly to cryptocurrency, decentralized cryptocurrency? They're not going to be, and this comes into play, and the reason I'm making another point here. Online, especially YouTubers, I hear, yes, we want government regulation. Yes, we want government regulation. Are you an idiot? Government regulation is never going to be positive. Never, ever going to be positive for us. Sorry, I've got somebody calling. Social credit score, regulations are never going to be positive for the quote unquote the people. They just aren't. Check this news story out. China introduces mandatory face scans for phone users. So now, and I read about this somewhere else. I came across it just before I did this video in this podcast. So now you're going to have to go and before you can use your phone, you buy a brand new phone, you have to do a face scan on your phone. Now, this is, to me, scary because it does a few things. It helps confirm other face. It basically, it's like giving everyone an instant fingerprint to the government, except it's a face scan, especially in a place like China. So this is crazy. Before you can use your phone, you've got to be able to scan your face. And before you say, oh, I wouldn't do that, it's a policy for the country. And I think this is another thing. Most people, I had a conversation with a friend of mine, and he's like, listen, I live in Michigan, and, up here there's things like militias and people are waking up. I would disagree with you. I wholeheartedly don't think most people are waking up at all. And I actually think most people don't care. As long as it doesn't hurt me and it doesn't make my life too uncomfortable, I think most people will go along to get along. And that's really sad because you're opening up an entire population to be able to get manipulated. And this becomes especially true if you have anything. So one of the things in China also, they have more billionaires, or they've gained more billionaires than any other economy in the world right now over the past several years. But they've also wrecked a few billionaires. And basically, you have to act a certain way if you're going to be rich in China. For example, Jack Ma, the owner or the CEO of Alibaba, largest, basically the Amazon of China, for lack of better terms. So Alibaba, Jack Ma is a billionaire worth tens of billions of dollars. So, however, he is a staunch supporter of the president of China. And when you hear him talk, you would think, wow, really? Why? Well, maybe he really believes what he's saying, but the reality is he has to. He would lose everything that he's built. Jackie Chan lives in Hong Kong. Now, I don't know this for sure, but Jackie Chan obviously is a Chinese martial artist that also has had a very successful career here in the U.S., but he lives in Hong Kong. Now, Hong Kong is one of the freest economy in the world. Hong Kong has very much kind of a democratic sort of government, but China is currently exerting its force on Hong Kong. And that's why there's all these protests. By the way, if you've ever wondered why there's all these protests and if you ever see the Hong Kong protests, why they all wear masks, it's because of the facial recognition software. They don't want backlash from the facial recognition software that's in every camera all over the streets. So someone like Jackie Chan, who clearly probably can understand freedom and democracy, I'm just assuming that, he may be Chinese to his core. He may love the Chinese culture. It's, where he's from, but he chooses to live in Hong Kong. The closest place where you can get true Chinese culture, still be from essentially China, but at the same time living in probably the freest or most democratic place that you can, that it has a strong Chinese culture. Yet, he comes out during the Hong Kong protest. Now, I assume that he's living in Hong Kong because he appreciates the freedom of living in a place like Hong Kong versus mainland China. That's just an assumption. I have no way of proving that. But yet he comes out publicly and during the Hong Kong protest and says, I'm a defender of the Chinese flag, something to the effect of, I support the Chinese government and I hope this can end peacefully. But the man has to. He can be forced to lose everything if he doesn't say that. I don't know if he really believes that. My point is, whether he believes it or not, he has no choice but to say that. And that's just control. Now, currently in America, the way a lot of this happens is it happens subtly through media. And there was a very, very interesting documentary, a 5-minute clip really on, where's it at? On climate change. And that thing, listen, food for thought. A lot of people, the whole climate change thing. Now, I will concede that I think that there's changes to the economy, to the climate. However, I truly believe they're way blown out of proportion. Like, I don't know if you've heard this whole thing, in 12 years, the economy, the globe's going to end. I think for 100% fact, that is the stupidest thing on the planet. Literally. Don't believe it for a moment. But listen to this. This was put up by John Stossel. And again, you can go to John Stossel on YouTube and you can watch this. The heading is, Are We Doomed? It was recorded on November 19th. But listen to this, and I'll stop it. It's just about 5 minutes, but I'll stop it to interject a little bit. Listen.
This environmental catastrophe bearing down on us.
This is Elizabeth Warren herself.
I keep hearing that we're killing the earth.
How dare you? You have stolen my dreams, my childhood.
But wait, I've been a consumer reporter for years. I've covered so many scares. Plague, famine, and perpetual war will kill us. We're going to run out of oil. Nuclear power will give us cancer. Killer bees swarm ever closer. Bird flu, flesh-eating bacteria. The list of terrible things that we're going to get us is long. And yet we're living longer than ever. None of those scares turned out to be as frightening as the warnings.
I think that's incredibly important to think about. What motivates these scare tactics? And on the YouTube channel, he talks about DDT, lawn chemicals, claymates, however you say that, cyclamates, nitrates, MSG, red dye number 2, saccharin, NutraSweet, aspartame, electric power lines, hair dye, asbestos in your hair dryers, coffee, Interesting thing about coffee is you can find people who tout the health benefits of coffee, and then it's going to kill you. Electric blankets, computer terminals, and he goes on and on and on. But if you're over 19 years old, you've heard a lot of these not myths. You've heard a lot of these scare warnings or scare messages, and it's like, so what's ever happened? Now, I'm not saying. I think John Stossel kind of goes on to say that a lot of this stuff is not real and it's just scare tactics. I think that I've looked at some of the research on some of these topics, and there definitely is some compelling research on some of the topics, but I would agree that they're all overblown for the most part. But let's continue to listen to what John Stossel has to say.
But I'm told global warming is different.
Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The alarm?
You got to go watch this video and see that girl's facial expression when she says that. It's really unbelievable. I mean, dramatic much. Lord have mercy. We got to watch this again. Listen to this again. I can't help it.
Collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The alarm?
A mass extinction. Humans are going to all get wiped off the planet in 12 years or less.
Have evidence that supports their fears. Temperature is rising. The UN predicts that it'll rise another 2 to 5 degrees. But does that justify the fear?
Climate change is not a lie, so please don't let our planet die.
So here's my thing, and he's going to have some experts that are going to talk about this in a moment. But the majority of the people who demonstrate, and they just show these pictures on this YouTube video of hundreds, maybe thousands in a few places, basically protesting climate change. But here's my question. Where do these people, and this is the most important question, this is not about whether climate change is real or not. It's about where is the messaging coming from? Because the messaging is what can be manipulative where do you think the majority of these people who are protesting, did they actually do any of their own research? Did they look at anything at all? Did they even look at competing documentaries to be able to make, somewhat of a independent decision? Did they go that far? Which I would not say that's true independent thought pattern. But did they look up any of these studies, like even one study on their own, or did they just hear it from someone who they believed or they liked, or did they hear it enough on the 6 o'clock news, or did they see enough ads or enough political ads on Facebook or whatever, Instagram, talking about these things, that they eventually just said, yeah, climate change is bad? I mean, you just have to ask yourself, where is the public getting their opinion from? Exactly how are they coming to their conclusions? Because I think that answer is where the manipulation comes in. And then you have to ask yourself, and the person who's giving that message, what is their motivation? Politically, I think it's just about political power and political control, getting elected. Now, I actually believe that the main purpose in the climate change scare tactics here, we're just talking about the scare tactics, is about carbon taxes and basically taxing citizens. This is about government and global control, and that's why I have a hard time even being objective about it, because if you go too far down and look at what are some of the international solutions proposed by some of the greatest policymakers in the world, it often comes down to some form of a carbon tax. And that is a carbon tax on governments, but where does it come from? If your country has to pay carbon taxes, who pays for that? The average citizens on the street pay for it. And that's where it starts getting like, what is this really all about? But that's another topic for another time. Let's keep going.
To justify this claim, we have 12 years to act. We have 12 years.
12 years before the effects are irreversible.
Really? 12 years?
It's warmed up around 1 degree Celsius since 1900, and life expectancy doubled the industrialized democracies, and yet that temperature ticks up another half a degree, and the entire system crashes. That's the most absurd belief.
I recently moderated this debate on climate change at the Heartland Institute. Well, not a debate, because the alarmists who were invited didn't show. Heartland invited many.
Please come over here and sit next to that place and let's have a discussion. There are a lot more people want to hear what you have to say.
Climate alarmists never agree to debate.
We'd love to offer you the airtime. We will give it to you. I'll give you a special phone number that goes to this phone.
I invited Al Gore on my show often, but he would never come.
In order to solve the climate crisis,
he makes a lot of speeches, but won't respond to people who disagree. It's too bad that the alarmists won't debate, because so much of what they say deserves debate.
The world is going to end in 12 years if we don't address climate change.
12 years.
well, and in 12 years, it'll be 12 more years.
David Legates is a professor of climatology at the University of Delaware. Pat Michaels is former president of the American Association of State Climatologists. Willie Soon is an astrophysicist.
It's all about arm waving, it's about emotion, about sending out kids in protest. We have nothing to do with the science.
This group pointed out that
So he talks about hand waving and sending out kids in protests. Again, the question is, where do the kids get their information from? And you can come watch this. We're about halfway through it. I'm not going to play the whole thing, but it's very interesting. It's very fascinating to watch. But here's the number one question. If climate change is a lot to do about nothing, if it's overblown, if it's overrated, and it's fascinating because they concede that the planet has warmed up a little bit in this video, and they talk about the true effects of that. They concede that oceans are rising because of climate change if you watch this video, but they talk about how the effects are being overblown, so to speak. And it's just interesting if you think about what comes from government, the messaging that comes from government. And this is important. And I'm talking about this, and I'm talking about China, because cryptocurrency is going to be the same way. People, and I played that clip with John McAfee. He's absolutely correct. The cryptocurrency ultimately will exist because there's going to be some sort of I think, economic civil war. It's going to be people revolting, because here's the thing. No matter how much money you make, no matter how much money you save, your entire wealth can be evaporated in a few short years by bad fiscal policy, by governments printing too much money, by inflation getting out of hand. I mean, there's some news stories out there. There's some websites that discuss how the government has been adjusting how they calculate inflation. And I've seen both sides of the argument about the new calculations and whether they're better or worse. And I actually can't make a decision on that specifically because I can't make up my mind whether it's truly better or truly worse. But here's what I can tell you. The governments do have a strong incentive to downplay inflation. We're talking about governments in the U.S. specifically. They have a strong incentive to downplay inflation because if inflation goes up too much, Social Security, one of the single biggest liabilities financially that the U.S. government has directly to its citizens, would go up because Social Security is supposed to go up with inflation. It doesn't. I mean, all you got to do, it doesn't. All you got to do is look at history and see that it doesn't keep up with inflation. However, neither here nor there. The point is, long-term, cryptocurrency will exist because at some point, I believe, I hope, the people rise up and say enough is enough. I don't want to, with all of the problems with things like Bitcoin, with all of the problems with things like processing transactions. So they say that one of the issues with Bitcoin is it can't process high enough volume of transactions, even with second layer solutions and scaling like the Lightning Network. There's this argument that it just can't keep up. It just can't keep up. And that's fine. And I think that in a day and age when you feel like you have a choice between fiat and cryptocurrency, there's a real argument that people are going to choose fiat currency. But if you get to a place where inflation's getting too high and you're losing the value, there's no way that the U.S. government is going to be able to keep their level of spending going forever. Now, they may last the next 5 years, it may last the next 10 years. But there's no way on the planet, in my personal opinion, that it can last indefinitely. And therefore, ultimately, cryptocurrency is going to come into play. I believe that currently Bitcoin is the most likely crypto to be used for a currency mass adoption throughout the entire world. And I have on my YouTube channel, and I'll put it into my YouTube video, but on my YouTube channel, I actually have an entire playlist about cryptocurrency and why I believe Bitcoin is going to go to $1 million. And a lot of that has to do with the math, and a lot of it's dependent on the world relying on Bitcoin as a primary cryptocurrency. And I believe ultimately that's what's going to happen. Those of us that are in the crypto space now, though, we're early. People are like, oh, when's mass adoption is going to happen? When mass adoption is going to happen? I don't think mass adoption is going to happen for another decade. And maybe longer. And I'll tell you why. Because the governments of the world are really good about kicking the financial can down the road. There's all sorts of things they can do to affect monetary policy to prevent people from realizing in their day-to-day lives how bad, at least in the U.S., how bad we are financially. So, for example, 20 years ago, heck, 25, 30 years ago, you got a home mortgage, you might pay 8% in interest. In my lifetime, I remember interest rates that were as high as 10%. You will never, in America, see a home mortgage with 8 or 10% interest ever again. I don't believe it will ever happen. Why? Because interest rates can never go up that high. That home mortgage interest rate is because the federal interest rate was, probably, 6, 7, 8%. 5, 6, 7, 8%, somewhere in there. And then, of course, by the time it got down to the end consumer through banking and the markup on interest rates, you're at a much higher interest rate for a home mortgage. But with interest rates below 1%, arguably we're going to end up having negative interest rates, which is crazy to even think about. With that happening, governments for a while will continue to be able to kick the can down the road. That's why a part of what I'm doing in my own financial life is really and truly buying and holding cryptocurrencies. Buying and holding. And if you want to know exactly which cryptocurrencies I'm holding, then make sure you go over to YouTube, check out Crypto Wealth on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it. Now, the other thing that I'm doing is I'm looking to create passive investments in cryptocurrency. There are investments in dApps and decentralized applications referral programs and things like that allow you to earn passive cryptocurrency. And I'm always looking to earn passive cryptocurrency. On YouTube, you can go down in the description and subscribe to my crypto passive profits strategy newsletter if you want to stay up to date on what I'm doing in the passive space. I've got several projects out there. There's dApps out there that I got running. I use the web browser, the crypto web browser. You can check the link in the description. And this browser is incredible. And I'm going to put out a video. It won't be in a podcast, but I'll actually put out another video on my YouTube channel where I'm going to talk about the CryptoTab web browser and how I'm using it, and just show you how my earnings have just gone way up. I mean, increased by 20% in just earning passive Bitcoin, passive cryptocurrency. And I believe something like that web browser is really good at probably helping people earn their very first little bit of cryptocurrency. I mean, it's far better than things like faucets out there. Outside of you just sending someone a little cryptocurrency, being able to give them a web browser that operates like the Chrome web browser, identical to Chrome, except it's earning you Bitcoin, mining Bitcoin in the background, a little tiny bits of Bitcoin that adds up. I'm doing about $1 a day just using this little web browser. Some of the technology, the projects that are out there in the cryptocurrency space, and I'll cover them more both on the podcast and on my YouTube channel. So make certain that you stay subscribed to both. I'm going to be covering more of both of these sort of projects and platforms on my channel. Thank you so much for watching today. Just know this: if you're a part of the cryptocurrency revolution, you own even one Satoshi. You own even one, Latoshi, one piece of a cryptocurrency. Then I believe that you're so far ahead of the mass population, and I truly believe that we're going to see a blockchain evolution that's going to eventually, this will be the single largest advancement in technology in the past century, probably the past 2 or 3 centuries. Like, I literally believe blockchain technology is going to transform the world. I believe that we'll see some of the greatest wealth transfer in human history occur directly from cryptocurrency, businesses associated with cryptocurrency, projects around the cryptocurrency space, entrepreneurs who are associated in this space. I mean, we're so far ahead of the game. Now, mind you, not financial advice. Cryptocurrency as an investment is extremely risky. And we may not see full returns on this, in the next 10, 20 years. I mean, when I say full returns, I mean the maximum returns we are going to see will be at some point in the future through mass adoption. That's when we'll see Bitcoin hit $1 million per Bitcoin. And if you don't believe it, you got to go watch the channel, my playlist at the end of my YouTube video, this YouTube video where this podcast is taking place. But we're so far ahead of everyone else in the world because we're at least aware of cryptocurrency. We own a little bit of cryptocurrency. We're participating in cryptocurrency projects. I mean, literally, this is the tip of the spear when it comes to mass adoption. That's where you're at. We're so early today. But continue to pay attention to the fundamentals. Continue to pay attention to the news stories that are happening around you. Specifically, watch governments continue to go into debt and watch governments to continue to exert control. Because I think it's through a rebellion. If this hasn't been clear, I think it's through a rebellion of government's financial policies and through a rebellion of government control that ultimately will have the people choose to use, own, and to transact in a decentralized third-party blockchain cryptocurrency. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for listening on the podcast if you're listening to the podcast. Stay tuned for more.